On behalf of all the creators here at the Shoddycast, thank you for your patronage. Enjoy.
It is a realm of great upheaval, war and bloodshed, wondrous magic, and spectacular marvel. Those who live there know what it is to be afraid. It is a time of monsters and monster hunters. The world of The Witcher is home to many forms of life, but what truly sets it apart are the monstrosities that reside there. Some kill out of hunger, others for pleasure, and still others for more sinister purposes. When people think of monsters, they often think of ravening beasts. But many of these fiendish creatures have capacity for reasoning and logic. That is in fact what makes them so dangerous. That is why you hire a witcher. Make no mistake, not all monsters are nightmarish animals. Many walk on two legs and call themselves human, elf, or dwarf. They wage war, topple cities, and slaughter the innocent without mercy or remorse. They are what some would call the true evil, the real threat. To best understand the nature of this evil, to best understand the world of The Witcher, one has to go back to the beginning. Our story begins on the continent, which was settled thousands of years ago by the non-human races. First discovered by the gnomes, the continent would soon be populated by both elves and dwarves as well. As is inevitably the case, war soon broke out. After the bloodshed had run its course, the combatants established roots in various geographic locales. The gnomes and dwarves created a home for themselves in the craggy mountain regions, while the elven race retreated to the heavily wooded forests and plains. For a time, the elder races lived alongside each other, each to their own. For over 500 years, there was peace and coexistence. Then came the humans. The emergence of humans on the face of the continent changed the balance of power irrevocably. So it was that it took several hundred years for the old races to realize there was now a new threat to their way of life. Shortly, humans had conquered the elder races, and man built their civilization on the ruined ashes of dwarven and elven society. The response to this abuse was the formation of the Sociatel, rebels and guerrilla fighters who answered the exploitation of the old races with violence, plunder, and destruction. The Sociatel used commando tactics, as well as independent squads and lone operatives, to battle the human kingdoms. With the coming of the age of humans, many legends have been born. Enter Geralt of Rivia, a man born of mortal blood, yet possessed of fearsome supernatural might. He is known as a Witcher, and his actions would soak his world in blood and singe it with fire. With the coming of the age of humans, many legends have been born. Enter Geralt of Rivia, a man born of mortal blood, yet possessed of fearsome supernatural might. He is known as a witcher, and his actions would soak his world in blood and singe it with fire. Witchers are mutated persons who have been used to protect the human race against the horrors of the continent. To meet a witcher in battle is a humbling thing, since their conditioning makes them terrifyingly fast, brutally strong, and resilient to the point of near invulnerability. Witchers are chosen as children based on indications of potential. They then undergo training so rigorous, a full 60% of those selected do not survive the process. Taught the finer points of combat, alchemy, and herbalism, witchers-to-be are subjected to mysterious rituals designed to allow them to use the arcane force of magic. These rituals also grant witchers greater sensitivity to enchanted items and beings. Magic is arguably the greatest weapon a witcher has in his arsenal. The art of magic is described as bending the power of chaos to one's will. This power is harnessed by witchers, mages, and sorceresses. Additionally, there are items, places, and even creatures that have been granted with aspects of magic and hold great power within them. This harnessing of the chaos allows users to create enchantments for healing, teleportation, destruction, and illusion. This can come in the form of spells, which must be crafted by mages or the more magically adept sorceresses. Chaos can also be wielded by way of a witcher's signs, which mostly require an act of will and a hand gesture. Some children are born naturally adept at magic and can be helpful to humans, as well as distinctly destructive and dangerous. Such beings have given birth to many stories, but these myths tend to be nothing but fairy tales, and for the denizens of the continent, life is far from a fairy tale. For the vast majority, life is full of fear, sorrow, and uncertainty. While the nobles squabble over petty rivalries, the poor die in the slums, and the young die in their wars. Religious zealots preach their hate from the temple, and individuals are judged by their appearance and pedigree rather than their character. The peasants are no better. They follow the loudest voice like sheep, and their lives are no more honest than the lives of those who lord over them. Most people on the continent care only for themselves. They are all monsters in their own way. Even a witcher doesn't raise his sword without the promise of coin. If you came here seeking a story of noble heroes and fairy tale endings, you have another thing coming. This is the world of the Witcher, a world ruled by monsters. The powers of the Witcher are fearsome and many. So must it be for those who would stand against the terrifying demons and monsters who roam the continent. 1,500 years ago, a collision of several parallel universes, known as the conjunction of the spheres, occurred. Popular lore would have us believe that this cataclysm ruptured the veil between countless worlds. This event left beasts and demons stranded on the continent, and monsters that should have never existed now threaten all life on the face of the world. Such fiendish animals have given birth to many legends, and the line separating reality from myth grows forever thinner. But make no mistake, monsters are real. Many cultures recount tales of ocean-dwelling giants that terrorize the high seas. Bestial terrors with long tentacles and a predisposition for destruction. For over 100 years, the Karen lived beneath the thriving waters of the Pontar. The villagers who lived in the nearby port city grew accustomed to the massive creature, naming it the Old Man. It is believed the Karen is one of the strange invaders who entered this world during the conjunction of the spheres. The monstrous beast coexisted with humankind for many years, but one day became enraged. Using its many enormous tentacles, each as long as a fallen tree and dripping with venomous mucus, the Karen took to crushing merchant ships and shredding fishing nets. The denizens of the port city lived in constant fear of being plucked from the shoreline by the frenzied monster, only to be drawn beneath the murky waters, never to be seen again. That was until a certain witcher put an end to it. Unlike the terrible Karen, who despite its destructive nature is just an animal, other monsters bridge the gap between unreasoning beasts and sentient beings. Legend states trolls are born of earth and made of rock. Other traits that have been attributed to them are an aversion to sunlight, which some believe turns them to stone. This, of course, has been proven false and should be disregarded as myth. The truth is, trolls are sentient, but primitive, with a minimal intelligence level that allows them to communicate with humans and each other. Trolls can be reasoned with, but were once hunted by witchers for fear of their alleged taste for human flesh. Today, humans and non-humans have come to accept the lumbering creatures because of their talent for building. While flesh and blood creatures present a clear danger to humans on the continent, their menace pales in comparison to otherworldly beings who find their way back into the realm of the living after death. Campfire stories about restless spirits may scare a child into a sleepless night, but the wise man knows such tales hold a grain of truth. Ask him if ghosts are real, and he might spin you a tale about wraiths luring women to the doom, or drowned men who have returned from their watery graves to prey on the world of the living. The poor souls who so abruptly meet their end risk coming back as wraiths themselves. Having no memory of their prior lives, they are guided strictly by their hatred towards the living, until the day they find rest at the end of a witcher's blade. After the conjunction of the spheres had run its course, another abomination found its way into our world: the vampire. There are many types of vampires harassing this realm, and they vary greatly from those of popular myth. While their appetite for blood and life force is indeed most acute, higher vampires do not need to consume blood for survival. For some, it has an intoxicating effect, similar to alcohol in humans. Many of the weapons supposedly used to battle vampires, such as garlic and crucifixes, will elicit only laughs, and wooden stakes do little more than annoy the nearly indestructible blood drinkers. Over time, vampires have even managed to adapt to the scathing rays of the sun. The rumor that being fed on by a vampire leads to vampirism is also untrue. In the Witcher's world, vampires are born, not made. When one has sufficiently harnessed the chaos-driven power of magic, it is possible to create beings comprised almost solely of water, earth, fire, and air. These golems, or elementals, are completely fearless, unquestioning, and possessed of truly frightening strength. They are often used to protect valuables or treasures. When an elemental has decided on its target, it does not stop advancing until the mark is utterly destroyed, as many a thief has discovered in their final, fleeting moments. These are but a few of the bizarre and wondrous beings that can be found in the world of the Witcher. There are creatures that roam the continent so outlandish, one cannot possibly hope to defeat them on their own. The need to protect humanity from these fiends led to the creation of the Witcher, and continues to be the primary reason such warriors exist. The conjunction of spheres was an event without precedence in this world. When universes collide, strange things may happen, strange and often dangerous. When humans came to this world, they were faced with hostile, alien creatures. These post-conjunction monsters had no place here, no niche to fill. But they wanted one, and so they carved it out with fangs, claws, tentacles, venom. But humanity fought back. Humanity had witchers. How do you kill a monster? One that's faster, stronger, and more vicious than anything you've ever seen. You hire a witcher. These professional monster killers carry a pair of swords, meteorite steel and silver. Of course, they aren't simple sellswords. They use their weapons the way a painter uses a brush, with precision and efficiency. They have to, for their prey is nothing less than the most dangerous creatures known to man. Cutting a ghoul's jugular or piercing through a weak spot in an arachnomorph's armor can decide whether a hunter lives or dies. That knowledge is what makes a witcher different from common sellswords. But memorizing entire treatises on monster physiology is just a part of their training. It also includes ruthless conditioning, the secrets of herbalism and alchemy, and even mastering basic magic. Signs. They are mere toys for mages, but for a witcher, they are an invaluable tool. Still, this knowledge is not unique to the witchers, and their signs pale in comparison with the might of a true sorcerer. What sets a witcher apart is the simple fact that he is a mutant. Witchers were created by renegade mages to fight the monsters that emerged through the conjunction. They took orphans, bastards, society's outcasts, and trained them in the art of combat, fed them secret mushrooms and herbs known only to the mages to make them strong and healthy. Training conditioned them to master pain and refine their endurance. When their initial training was complete, these children would be subjected to the trial of grasses and the change. These mysterious, magical procedures were developed long ago by the renegades specifically to mutate men. Exposure to the grasses, mutagenic herbs, and viral cultures changed. Many died before the process of magically controlling the transformation was perfected. Even then, it was painful, brutal. The elixirs fundamentally changed their physiology, made them something more and something less than human. Those who responded to the mutations well underwent further experiments. When the changes were completed, the boy was replaced by a man looking at the world with inhuman, animal eyes. The change granted near total immunity to disease, tolerance for venom and poisons that would kill a grown man in moments, and inhuman speed, strength, and ferocity that made them legendary. Their tolerance for poison also allows them to imbibe elixirs and concoctions that would kill normal humans, elves, and even dwarves. Rather than kill, they aid the witcher. They make him even faster, stronger, able to see in the dark, and regenerate wounds rapidly. Neutralize venom that would knock a witcher out otherwise. Without them, a witcher is a powerful foe. With them, he is unstoppable. Why are witchers so rare, then? It is important to remember that their invaluable services never really brought them a place in society. Witchers were unnatural creatures, artificially created mutants designed for killing abominations. Like their prey, they had no real place in the world. The itinerant warriors lived to kill, giving rise to myths, legends, and terrible rumors. A century ago, these rumors coalesced into an anonymous pamphlet containing a long-winded, hateful rant against the witchers. The false, bigoted image of a witcher as a violent, lecherous sadist spread like wildfire through the kingdoms. Man fears the unknown and incomprehensible, and to the average peasant, the monster hunters were both. That led to the massacre. A mob, drunken with rage and hatred, stormed the largest fortress of the Witchers, Kaer Morhen. It held the only laboratory where the trial and change could be performed. The Witchers didn't expect the mob to have mages supporting them. By the time the walls were breached, it was too late. The mob slaughtered everyone, mage, witcher, trainee. At the end of the day, the old sea keep was looted, its inhabitants slain by the very people they fought to protect. With the death of the Witcher elders and mages, the secrets of the Trial of Grasses were lost. The sole survivor of the massacre, fencing master Vesemir, knew little about the process. Others knew nothing. The long death of the Witchers began that day. The hunters continue to travel the world. Their mutations slow down aging, allowing them to live centuries. Yet with each year there are fewer and fewer Witchers, killed off by monsters and circumstances. If you meet one, you meet a grizzled relic with decades of experience, continuing his thankless duty in a world that no longer needs him. A world of lies, intrigue, and subterfuge. A world where thousands die fighting for a king they never knew. Where hundreds succumb to plagues and starvation. Where honesty invites exploitation. The kind of world where sorcerers and sorceresses feel right at home. This world is full of mystery, fraught with danger and adversity. Some thrive in it, but most just suffer. The common folk are those who are usually dealt the short end of the stick in this dog-eat-dog reality. Of course, there's also the opposite end, where the rich and powerful dwell. But even among them, there are exceptional individuals, those who stand out in a crowd, not because of the jewels they wear or the crown resting on their heads. I'm talking about mages, sorcerers, and especially the sorceresses. Ever since Jan Becker first tamed magic 500 years ago, these individuals have been gaining power and influence, carving out a niche for themselves. Humans didn't master the arcane instantly. It took years, and much of it was gained from the elven mages at Loch Muin, where the first sources, child prodigies, and natural conduits for magic were taught its secrets. With power came strife and rivalry. Priests, druids, and even kings felt threatened by the rising power of the sorcerers. Rather than risk hostility, they negotiated, created a compromise. The Novigrad Union was the result. A treaty that established the separation of magic and state, and formalized the principles of non-aggression between magic users and the rest of the world. Who knows? Maybe they even respected the treaty for a few years after their signatures dried on the parchment. It definitely didn't stop the mages, not by a long shot. They have snaked their way into the good graces of kings and nobles. You could hardly come into court and not notice a man or a woman standing on the sidelines, observing, taking notes. They were everywhere power could be had, but some wanted more. Perhaps it's this greed that motivated Vilgefortz and his cronies to betray the northern kingdoms of Tanid, during the largest meeting of magic wielders of our time. His betrayal destroyed the community of magic users in the north and the trust that existed between them and the rulers. It came just as Nilfgaard crossed the Yaruga River, beginning the Second Northern War. The sorceresses rose from the ashes, salvaging what they could, and succeed they did. Just look at Redania, its leadership decapitated with the assassination of their king. Felipa Elhart and the Spy Master brought it to heel with blood and magic, a sign of things to come. Rumor has it that the surviving sorceresses formed a secret lodge to control the empire and the kingdoms, guiding them both to peace and prosperity, while latching themselves firmly on to the structures of power. They say they orchestrated the battle at Brenna, where Norderlings and Imperials bled each other so much the grass grew crimson in the coming years. Of course, they also say that the Emperor used to be a giant hedgehog, so make of it what you will. What I know is that the sorceresses came out of the war with their heads held high, rather than feet forward, more beautiful, more powerful, and prouder than ever. They weren't always that beautiful, or that influential, of course. I know for a fact that Yennefer of Vengerberg, the stunning dame with raven hair and scorching fire in her heart, was once a hunchback. If you ever meet her, look into those eyes, and you can sometimes see an abused, envious cripple looking back at you. Impossible, you say? Hard, but not impossible. Mages opted for the old, mature look, but the sorceresses knew that to maintain the brand, you had to look the part. The girls that went into the School of Magic, no matter how average-looking they were or what defects they had, came out stunning. They could be a hunchback, have a hair lip, buck tooth, flat feet. The elder sorceresses would fix them up with magic, straighten out the bones, shrink the teeth, realign the faces, remake the back. It's the same magic that returns eyesight, restores scorched skin, brings people back from the brink of death. It can't save those too far gone, as a certain sorceress learned during the Battle of Sodden in the First War, when a spell ripped off all her limbs. You would be wise to remember that the power these beautiful women use, the power they think they tamed, is a primal force that gives and then takes away. The Empire learned that the hard way at Sodden, even though they had their own mages, brought to heel by the Emperor of Nilfgaard. The Norderlings too learned it when Kedwin invaded Edirn a few years back, and a sorceress named Sabrina Glevisid annihilated the armies of both kingdoms, allegedly on the orders from the Lodge. We cannot ask her if this is true. The King of Kedwin burned her at the stake. I think, my friends, this describes life in the Northern Kingdoms well. A balancing act on the edge of a pit of vipers. The truth of our times is that there's not a piece of land in our world that is not claimed as property by someone. No matter if it's fertile lands or a hermit's cottage deep within some nameless swamp, you can be sure that there's a carnivore out there somewhere digging their jewel-adorned claws into it. The predators may wear crowns and bear titles by the dozen, but they cannot hide their true colors. Not that they care to. The coalitions formed to fight against Nilfgaardian Empire in recent history may have turned the kingdoms into a single pack, but the moment the empire was thrown back, the predators started to turn on each other. Such is the fate of this pit of vipers we call the North. Am I exaggerating? Suffice it to say that after the northern kingdoms defeated the empire at Sodden in 1263, it didn't take long for them to resume their bickering. Redania, with its vast farmlands but underdeveloped industry, could not fight against the influx of cheap goods from the empire in the south. The king of Redania, Vizimir, reacted by instituting staple rights in cities it controlled and influenced. King Foltest of Temeria returned the favor by severely undercutting Redanian merchants. This resulted in Redania establishing prohibitive importation tariffs to protect their economy from collapsing under the economic might of the empire. As for the kingdoms of Edern and Kedwin, to understand their quarrel, you need look no further than the fertile Pontar Valley. This stretch of land has been the source of food and wealth for the entire region. Whoever held the valley had the keys to the north. The squabble between the two kingdoms turned into armed conflict more than once, with perhaps the most heinous being the annexation of the valley by Kedwin, collaborating with Nilfgaardian Empire during the last war, before Kedwin turned on the empire, of course. Oh, how the nobility love a good backstabbing. But the four kingdoms aren't all there is in the north. The mighty maritime mercantile kingdom of Kovir and Povis is small in terms of size, but is a veritable economic giant. Fueled by decades of unlimited immigration from the Big Four, it monopolized the market for glass and salt and expanded to become key suppliers of gold, iron, silver, nickel, and other metals throughout the continent. When Redania and Kedwin attempted to subjugate it, they were summarily defeated by elite mercenary armies, often led by their own retired officers, convinced by the retirement funds of the northern kingdom. There's also Lyria, the small but fierce kingdom that lies between the Empire and Kedwin, though ruined by consecutive wars, but legendary for the guerrilla resistance under its queen. And of course, Cintra, the once mighty kingdom that ruled lands on both sides of the Yaruga River, with vassals across the surrounding land. All its might was for naught. When Nilfgaard invaded it, starting the First Northern War, Cintra's army was wiped out by the imperial might. The king was slain in combat, while the Lioness of Cintra was mortally wounded and returned to the capital. The undefeated city was stormed by imperial soldiers, leading to what's known in the northern kingdoms as the Rape of Cintra. Mothers killed their children. The few remaining men launched themselves in suicidal attacks on Nilfgaard troops, while the queen threw herself from the walls of the fortress. With her death, the kingdom of Cintra ceased to exist. Its lands annexed as an imperial province, vassalized by foreign powers or otherwise partitioned. By now, you're probably convinced that the Nilfgaardian Empire is the political equivalent of a post-conjunction monstrosity, of the kind that witchers slay, if you're a northerner at least. But come south of Yaruga, and you can see that it's not a monster. In fact, it's not at all. But come south of Yaruga, and you can see that it's not a monster. In fact, it's not all that much different from the north. True, all bend their knees before the absolute monarch ruling from Nilfgaard on the Alba, but its lands are a mosaic of kingdoms and realms just the same. There's one key difference. With all its faults, Nilfgaard has far fewer problems with elves and dwarves. In fact, the Empire fielded an entire elite regiment of elven troops. That alone should tell you volumes about the elder races and their place on the continent. When humans came to this world, it wasn't only inhabited by wildlife and savage conjunction beasts. No, when the first landing took place 500 years ago, the continent was already colonized, settled by gnomes, dwarves, halflings, and elves, the old races. The oldest are the gnomes and the halflings, if dwarven lore is to be believed. They inhabited the continent for thousands of years before the elves and humans came, and continue to do so to this day. Gnomish swords and technology are the best in the world, superior even to dwarven craftsmanship, while gnomes themselves are among the most capable trackers living. Halflings, on the other hand, seem to prefer agriculture to industry. These two races prefer to stay out of the power struggles of the continent, unlike the younger races, those being the elves, dwarves, and of course, humans. The short, stocky men with their large beards and powerful arms are known for their legendary ability to empty entire vats of booze and remain upright, achievements in industry and technology, as well as martial ability. They are excellent warriors. What they lack in height, they more than make up for with their strength, durability, and sheer tenacity. In many aspects, they are just like humans. In some, they are not. Where humans reach adulthood in their late teens and are set loose on society, dwarves only become adults when their beards reach their waists, around 55 years of age. Success in war, trade, or industry is also valued incredibly high. In fact, dwarves without notable accomplishments to their name are unlikely to even be considered as husbands by coveted dwarven beauties or their families. Practical goals create a pragmatic approach to life. This allowed them to integrate themselves into human society better than other old races. As talented blacksmiths, fierce warriors, traders, and bankers, dwarves can live good lives, mostly without fear of being persecuted for the simple fact of being non-human. Of course, persecution needs not take the obvious form of pogroms. Mahakam volunteers who fought alongside the Norderlings during the last war with Nilfgaard never received the proper supply or military aid simply because they were dwarves. The fourth of the old races was once a mighty people with a rich culture. In Sadid, elves. They are long-lived and practically immortal by human standards. Their beauty is unparalleled and does not tarnish with age. Inborn magical affinity makes elves extremely powerful mages, while their reflexes and strength make elven archers the most powerful ranged fighters the continent has ever seen. The elves are all but perfect and firmly believed in their superiority. Their culture emphasized patience, gravity, and controlling their emotions. The arrogance led them to ignore humans when they landed 500 years ago. After all, the elves ruled the continent for over 1,000 years by then. They defeated the dwarves and exterminated the Varans and claimed their cities as their own. How could anyone threaten them? The elves believed humans would soon move on or die out. They even indulged them, as it was when they accepted human children for magical training at Loch Muin, not long after the first landing. They did not understand that human thirst for power and control rivaled their own. A few years after the children completed their training, a Redanian army marched into the city and slaughtered the elves, triggering the first Elven-Human War. Elves fell back, surrendering their cities to humans. From these foundations, human cities like Novigrad and Vazima rose. Part of the reason for their retreat was that, unlike humans, elven women lost the ability to conceive after the first decades of their life, and even then, they could only bear children once every 10, 20 years. Humans did not have that problem. Elves realized they would lose to attrition, though perhaps it was also the discovery that humans and elves could interbreed. In fact, human men could cause elven women to become fertile, not just once per decade, but after every coupling. An uneasy peace followed, but only for a time. 200 years ago, a young elven woman, Elirin. 200 years ago, a young elven woman, Elirin, led the bulk of elven youth against humans to restore her people to glory. Her uprising was crushed without mercy. The elves became an endangered species overnight, without their youth. Survivors sued for peace. It once more was granted, and lasted for an even shorter time, until Lara Dorin and Creganen of Lod, a human mage, fell in love. The lovers were a symbol of peaceful coexistence between the races. And then they were killed, starting a war between humans and elves that lasts to this day. It takes the form of massacres, guerrilla raids, punitive expeditions, persecution. Of course, it isn't evenly spread. The northern kingdoms are infamous for their treatment of elves, while the Empire of Nilfgaard has actively courted them and other non-humans. The Empire even fielded an entire elven brigade. And secured the loyalty of non-human guerrillas in the north. Chapter 6. The Scoia'tael. One name inspires fear and hatred equally throughout the north. Scoia'tael. In the Elder Speech, it stands for squirrels. But about the only thing these gorillas have in common with their namesake are the tails they wear to identify themselves. Who are they? Well, that depends on who you ask. The North sees them as terrorists, waging an insurgent war against humans. Nilfgaard considers them freedom fighters, fighting oppression. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. They appeared when the First Northern War started. As Imperial troops crossed Yaruga and put Sintra to the sword, humans in Kedwin suddenly faced a new, terrifying enemy. Warbands composed of elves, dwarves, halflings, and other non-humans attacked human settlements. Their goal? Nothing less than the destruction of humans and the return of the elder races to their proper place in the grand scheme of things. Their motto: drive humans back into the sea. And they did. Partway, at any rate. Not through strength of arms, of course. The Scoia'tael favor guerrilla tactics, assassinations, attacking convoys, robberies, wiping out villages, encircling and destroying human troops. Unlike their foes, they feel right at home in the wilderness. Commando groups rarely count more than 20 heads each. Their small size ensures they can easily move undetected, strike, then disappear. It also made it easy to form new commandos to spread the revolution throughout the north. From Kedwin it spilled into Redania, Temeria, and Erden, fueled by humiliation and disillusionment suffered by the young dwarves and elves at human hands. They murdered, pillaged, and fought with humans for freedom and liberty. Or so they thought. The Scoia'tael were terrifyingly effective at undermining the Northern War effort and destroying the lives of their brethren. Every successful raid, every dead human, every village wiped clean by the Scoia'tael invited reprisals aimed at those of the elder races who tried to live peacefully alongside humans. Many accused them of supporting the Scoia'tael, and the resulting pogroms killed hundreds of elves, dwarves, and other elder races. Some of the survivors then joined the ranks of Scoia'tael, fighting against humans. The vicious cycle repeated itself. Suspicion and resentment between humans and other races in the north benefited Nilfgaard. In fact, it was all part of the Emperor's plan. The Scoia'tael were used by the Empire to open a second front deep behind northern lines. Many of them cooperated willingly, all in return for a promise of freedom, dignity, and prosperity. The North could offer little to match the Empire, which in fact did fulfill some of its promises. The elves were granted Dol Blathana as a sovereign kingdom during the First War. During the Second, Scoia'tael veterans were folded into Imperial armies as elite frontline units. The most infamous of these was the Vreehead Brigade, led by Isengrim Fulthiana. The elves served the Emperor as equals, fighting for their people. Like the commandos, they fought with fury, committing atrocities for the greater good. They were convinced they would write history. Until Nilfgaard lost the Second Northern War. The first defeat at Sodden was a blow to the Scoia'tael, but it did not break their loyalty. They continued their struggle against the northern kingdoms, fighting a war they could not possibly win. They thought of the Empire as their ally and waited for the call to rise up against the oppressors once more. When it came, they dutifully rose and aided the Empire. They bloodied their hands, and for their service, they were betrayed. After Nilfgaard's military might was broken at Brenna for the second time, the Emperor wanted peace as fast as possible, and to obtain terms favorable for Nilfgaard, he had to sacrifice pawns on the chessboard. Scoia'tael were hit the worst. The officer cadre of the Vreehead Brigade was surrendered to the Northern Kingdoms as war criminals and executed without mercy. Isengrim survived only because he escaped during transport. The commando units were cut loose, denied support or aid from the Empire. Special counterinsurgency units of the Northern Kingdoms, already infamous for their brutality in dealing with non-humans, were set loose on them. For years, the Scoia'tael were hunted down and exterminated. Only a few managed to survive. Among them, Yorvith, the most feared gorilla in the north. Yorvith was to Scoia'tael what Isengrim was to the Vreehead, a master of asymmetric warfare and a capable warrior in his own right. The Empire's betrayal was a wake-up call for him. Though he rebuilt his troop from scratch after it was destroyed by Temerian special forces, he no longer believed in liberation of his people through an uprising. Perhaps that's why he became a fervent supporter of Saskia and her plan to create an independent state in the Pontar Valley, where all would be free to live as equals, without fear of death or persecution for their race. Elf, dwarf, even human, laboring side by side for a common goal. Of course, there were those who did not abandon the idea of revolution, bringing them in conflict with some of the most powerful men in the Northern Kingdoms. Chapter 7. The Flaming Rose. The rise of the Scoia'tael and their rebellion created an imbalance of power in the north. Extremist elves, dwarves, and other elder races had no equivalent on the human side of the barricade. But humans hate to be outdone by anyone. The Order of the Flaming Rose was humanity's answer. It formed out of the Order of the White Rose, a military order that gained infamy for its focus on material wealth at the expense of their devotion to religious matters. 1,000 Novigradian crowns bought the title of knight. Sons of moneylenders and traders filled up the ranks, and it crumbled. Its knights more interested in whores than piety. Jacques d'Aldesburg rekindled the fire within the order. It is said that during the conclave, a white rose he held suddenly burst into flames, filling the attendees with awe and fear. He was chosen as the next Grand Master of the order and began to implement his reforms. A man of piety and a fervent believer in the eternal fire, Jacques named the new order after the rose that earned him his position. The order changed, focused towards a single goal, helping all humans and protecting them from monsters that lurk in the night. Monsters which include the Scoia'tael. The Order of the Flaming Rose helped spread the belief in the eternal fire through its selfless actions. Fanatical devotion to the creed helped convince many to adopt the faith. Every knee bent before the holy fire gave the Grand Master more power and influence. Redania realized that fanatics made for dangerous bedfellows and explicitly refused to allow it to set up its headquarters within the country. The Grand Master turned to Temeria and Aedirn as a result. As the Order cracked down on the Scoia'tael, it embedded itself into the structures of power, including acquiring territories that allowed it to launch attacks on the elven kingdom of Dol Blathana. There was more to this than just racism. Jacques de Aldersberg was haunted by terrible visions of the future. He believed that the only way for humanity to survive the coming Ice Age was to unite under a single banner and destroy all who would oppose it, including the elder races. To this end, he would form alliances behind the scenes, waging a secret war against the sorceresses of the Lodge and anyone else who could threaten his plans for humanity. He allied himself with a clandestine organization known as the Salamandra to harness the powers of the Witchers and use them for his goals. Through intense research, Azar Javed, one of Alderberg's many allies, mastered the process and even perfected it. The new army of fanatical, merciless troops spurred the Grand Master into action. Open persecution of the elder races and brutalizing of the Scoia'tael by members of the Order provoked them. Under Yavin, a veteran leader of the Scoia'tael and survivor of the Second Northern War, the uprising of the non-human population in the Temerian capital of Vizima began. Unknowingly, he played right into the plans of the Grand Master. By starting the largest uprising of non-humans since the war, he would give Aldersberg the excuse to acquire control of the Temerian army, depose King Foltest, and begin uniting humanity. The mutant soldiers and fanatical knights would be the hammer of humanity, and with their might behind them, Aldersberg would preserve humanity through the coming apocalypse. All his plans were for naught. Enter Geralt of Rivia. Geralt accepted the contract for the Grand Master's head after having stopped Salamandra and exposing Aldersberg's plans. When he confronted him in the central monastery of the Order of Vizima, de Aldersberg made a last-ditch attempt to convince him by showing the Witcher his apocalyptic vision and confronting him on the battlefield of his own mind. He failed. When they were found, Jacques de Aldersberg lay dead. Geralt was standing above the Grand Master's corpse. In his hand was the small, worn Demeritum amulet de Aldersberg habitually wore, the same one he gave just a few days earlier to Alvin, a small boy under his care, a boy who disappeared. A source. The death of the Grand Master broke the Order's might, reducing it to sellswords fighting for whomever was willing to pay. They lost their strongholds and support of the people. Their latest employer was the King of Redania, who used them for security during the summit at Loch Muin, and an insurance policy, if need be. Speculation about Aldersberg's death continues to this day. There are some who say they saw the wild hunt that day. They say that Geralt confronted the king of the hunt in a battle for the Grand Master's soul. Epilogue: The Wild Hunt. Myth, legend, and tale. These are the foundations of culture. Some of them are beautiful, others terrifying, and many hold a grain of truth. Humanity has adapted and repurposed most of the mythology of the elder races. However, humans are more than capable of creating their own ghost stories. The Wild Hunt is a tale that has no counterpart in either elven or dwarven culture. It tells of a ghastly procession of nightmarish warriors riding through the sky on skeletal horses. Their armor is rusted and rotten, draped over the bones of an undead knight. Where their eyes would be, a pale blue flame burns without ceasing. Every few years, they ride through the skies accompanied by lightning, thunder, and gale. Their song terrifies, but what truly strikes terror in the hearts of men is that with the appearance of the Wild Hunt, people start disappearing. The hunt has been appearing for centuries and took countless victims. During the Second Northern War alone, its bounty was terrifying, a score from the great city of Novigrad alone. There are tales that people abducted by the hunt sometimes return. These men, who disappeared without a trace, suddenly turn up decades later, having aged only slightly, if at all. They find nothing but the graves of their loved ones and dust where their lives would be. Many of them go insane, winding up in asylums as gibbering wrecks. Those who do not succumb to insanity speak of another world where time flows at a different speed and nothing is as it should be. Elves are apex predators and humans are slaves. They speak of war between unicorns and the elves, a rivalry born out of treachery. If they are to be believed, the nightmarish apparitions that many say they have witnessed are simply astral projections. The magic necessary to accomplish such a feat is mighty beyond compare. To make someone appear as a ghost in another dimension entirely, that is not just simple sleight of hand. Even sorceresses of the highest order can only project themselves within our reality, and only with years of practice and training, or access to magical artifacts. It seems impossible. However, there are accounts of a witcher who faced the Wild Hunt. There are people across the north who speak that the White Wolf, once believed dead after the pogrom in Rivia, returned from death. He was tracking the Wild Hunt, following its trail of abductions. They say he was looking for Yennefer, taken from him by the king of the hunt and his riders. It is said that he was joined by 3 other witchers from the south, trained in the school of the Viper. The 4 of them tracked the Wild Hunt down and confronted it when it stopped deep in the south. Under a tree of hanged men, they took stock of their captives before returning where they came from. You cannot kill a specter, yet under their blows, the warriors of the hunt fell. These warriors were not undead monsters or post-conjunction aberrations. Blood gushed from beneath their armor. They were indeed elves, but unlike any other. They did not understand pain and suffering like the elves of this world. They never experienced pogroms or persecution. They were proud, confident in their superiority. Their armor was a costume, a disguise to obscure their real nature. Nobody can confirm or deny these tales, least of all the witchers. 2 are most certainly dead, cut apart by the White Wolf in defense of King Henslet during Saskia's insurgency. 1 is missing, last seen in Loch Muin, about to confront Geralt, who disappeared shortly afterwards, going further south. He was chasing the Wild Hunt, as those who saw him last say. If these elves are real, then who are they? Why do the elves and dwarves stay silent, their lore containing no references to the hunt? One theory says they are relatives of the elves of this world, the Inseed, who split away and formed another civilization in another dimension, conquering it with fire and sword. The elves would have to commit a genocide of incredible proportions to establish their rule. More importantly, how are they able to travel through the dimensions? Legends speak of primordial ancient magic being able to do so, magic that no longer exists, except in those of the elder blood, like Jacques de Alsberg, whose death at Geralt's hands coincided with the appearance of the Wild Hunt. What is their goal? What is their purpose? I can offer no answers. But if I can hazard a guess, these elves no longer know how to travel between worlds. However they learned the art in the first place, they lost it, and are now scrambling to learn it again. I pray to the gods that I am wrong. But if I am right, then I believe there is only one person, one Witcher, who can fight back against the Wild Hunt and stop them. I fear that should he fall, we will all be put to the sword by these ancient nightmares. God speed, Geralt. Yours is a story for another day.
You've reached the end of this audiobook. Visit us on YouTube at youtube.com/Shoddycast.